Before the first shot was ever fired, before tanks rolled across Europe or bombers filled the skies, the fate of World War II depended on something far less glamorous. It wasn't a super weapon. It wasn't a secret project. It was movement. Because no army in history has ever won a war by strength alone. Wars are won by getting the right people, the right fuel, the right ammunition, and the right food to the right place at exactly the right time. And in World War II, the United States would discover that its most powerful weapon was not just firepower, but logistics. At the center of that revolution stood a small, simple, almost unassuming machine that would quietly change warfare forever. The Jeep. When the United States entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor, its military faced a brutal reality. America was separated from the main battlefields by entire oceans. Any war it fought would be a war of distance. Troops had to be transported across thousands of miles. Supplies had to flow non-stop through deserts, jungles, mountains, and ruined cities. Victory would not depend only on defeating the enemy in combat, but on sustaining forces far from home for years on end. This challenge forced the U.S. military to completely rethink how wars were fought. Mobility and logistics were no longer secondary concerns. They became the very foundation of modern warfare. Out of this necessity, one of the most iconic vehicles in military history was born. In 1940, the U.S. Army issued a request for a lightweight, four-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicle that could operate anywhere. The requirements were extreme. It had to be fast, durable, easy to repair, and capable of handling mud, sand, snow, and broken terrain. Several companies competed, but the design that emerged would become known simply as the Jeep. It was small, rugged, and brutally practical. There was absolutely nothing elegant about it, and that was exactly the point. What made the Jeep so revolutionary was not its firepower or its armor, but its incredible versatility. It could do almost anything. It carried soldiers, wounded men, officers, radios, ammunition, fuel, food, and even mounted machine guns. It towed artillery pieces, crossed rivers, climbed steep hills, and operated in places where larger, heavier vehicles completely failed. In a war defined by chaos, the Jeep brought reliability. Wherever American forces went, the Jeep went first, and often, it stayed until the very end. As U.S. forces landed in North Africa, advanced through the rugged terrain of Italy, stormed the beaches of Normandy, and pushed deep into occupied Europe, the Jeep became the backbone of daily military operations. Commanders used it to move rapidly between units, coordinating attacks and shoring up defenses. Medics used it to evacuate the wounded under fire, racing across cratered landscapes to save lives. Engineers used it to survey terrain and build critical supply routes. Infantry units depended on it to maintain contact, coordination, and speed. The Jeep was not just a vehicle. It was a system that kept the army alive, connected, and constantly moving forward. But the Jeep was only one piece of a much, much larger transformation. The United States approached World War II with a mindset that would redefine warfare, logistics as a form of strategy. American planners understood that battles were not isolated events. They were part of a continuous, unbroken flow of supply. Fuel had to reach the tanks. Ammunition had to reach the front lines. Food had to reach the soldiers every single day, without fail. If that flow stopped, the army stopped. So instead of focusing only on weapons, the U.S. military built an entire logistical ecosystem designed to move faster and farther than any military force in history. This meant trucks, millions of them. American factories produced transport vehicles in staggering, almost unbelievable numbers. Convoys stretched for miles, carrying everything from gasoline to spare parts across entire continents. Roads were built or repaired almost as quickly as territory was captured. In Europe, the Red Ball Express became legendary, a massive trucking operation that ran around the clock to supply advancing forces after D-Day. Thousands of drivers, many of them African-American soldiers in segregated units, pushed themselves and their vehicles to the absolute limit, knowing that every delay could cost lives at the front. The Jeep played a crucial role within this system because it operated at the final, most critical link of the supply chain. Massive supply depots meant nothing if the resources couldn't reach the last mile. The Jeep asterisk was asterisk that last mile. It moved supplies from the big trucks to the foxholes, from the rear-echelon depots to the forward command posts, from makeshift airstrips to frontline units engaged in combat. In modern terms, it was tactical logistics made mobile. The battlefield was no longer static. It flowed, and the Jeep flowed with it. This logistical superiority gave the United States and its allies a decisive, war-winning advantage. German forces, though often technologically advanced, with formidable tanks and aircraft, constantly struggled with fuel shortages, limited transport, and overstretched supply lines. Their blitzkrieg tactics were brilliant, but often unsustainable. American units, by contrast, could relocate, regroup, and resupply with astonishing speed. When breakthroughs occurred, they could be exploited immediately with fresh troops and supplies. When enemy resistance stiffened, reinforcements and ammunition arrived quickly. The Jeep, in its small but vital role, allowed commanders to think in terms of momentum, not just survival. By the end of the war, the impact of this logistical approach was undeniable. The United States had not only helped defeat the Axis powers, but had permanently changed how wars would be fought in the future. Logistics was no longer the invisible, unglamorous part of war. It became doctrine. Military planners around the world studied the American system, understanding that future conflicts would be decided not only by weapons, but by supply chains, transport networks, and operational flexibility. And the legacy of the Jeep didn't end in 1945. After the war, it became a global symbol of reliability and freedom, entering civilian life across the globe. Farmers used it to work their land. Explorers trusted it to take them to the most remote corners of the earth. Entire industries were inspired by its rugged, functional design. But its greatest legacy remains a military one. Every modern army today operates under principles shaped by the hard-won lessons of World War II logistics. Rapid deployment, modular supply systems, mobile command centers, and battlefield flexibility. All of these concepts trace their roots back to the systems built around vehicles like the Jeep. In the end, the story of the Jeep is the story of modern warfare itself. It proves that wars are not won only by the most powerful weapons, but by the ability to move, adapt, and sustain an army in the field. The Jeep didn't dominate headlines like bombers or battleships. It didn't inspire fear through sheer destruction. Instead, it quietly and reliably carried the weight of an army across a broken world. And in doing so, it helped create the logistical foundations of the modern age of war. Because sometimes, the machine that changes history is not the one that destroys the most, but the one that simply keeps everything moving. Thanks for watching.